Hello and welcome to this evening's special October 7th commemorative program, Testimonies Without Boundaries, featuring Alon Penzel. Thank you to those who are with us this evening and to those viewing this recording. If you have seen my programs before, you know I always give a loving shout out to my amazing and wonderful parents, Eddie and Lori, as well. And if you've met them, you know why I do. I'd also like to extend a special thank you to all of the speakers and presenters of these wonderful programs, especially tonight's guest, Alon Penzel, who I will be introducing to you shortly. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. Everyone loves a good origin story, so here's a story as to why I began these programs. With the rise of Jew hatred, I constantly found myself trapped in conversations arguing with people who consciously or unconsciously hate Jews. One example is when sharing resources during an International Holocaust Remembrance Day with a group of mental health professionals and students. The conversation quickly devolved into an attack on Jews, including the accusation that Jews use the Holocaust narrative to oppress and kill others. All of my time, attention, and energy was being dedicated to people who hate Jews. After trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results, I decided to shift my energy, my time, and my attention to my community and to producing educational content and programming for Jews and our allies. And in 2020, I launched the Sundays with Survivors program, the first of which featured Holocaust survivor Irving Roth of blessed memory. I added more Holocaust education programs, including Mondays Among the Nations, 2G Tuesdays, and 3G Thursdays. As you see, I like alliteration. They featured non-Jewish allies and children and grandchildren of survivors. As well, I added programming featured authors, educators, activists, politicians, actors, playwrights, and more to bring content that promotes Jewish pride and allyship and combats Jew hatred. These programs became my personal Hanukkah story, my dedication or rededication. Rather than focusing solely on putting out the flames of anti-Semitism, which spread like wildfire, and intentionally take our focus away from our personal and collective growth and development, I turned my attention to rekindling the light that sparks Jewish pride in education. And I looked for ways to keep that eternal light burning brightly for myself and others. And I started these programs, which I affectionately call the Rededication Project. Sadly, the hatred towards Jewish people and the Jewish state has only gotten worse over the decades. The difference between what I witnessed and experienced before October 7th and after is that before, people outwardly accused us of horrific things, things of which we did not do, modern day blood libels. But post October 7th, they finished the sentence, if this, then that. It is not only what they accuse us of, but now what we deserve. We are at a point of no return. The terrorist attack, the murder of Jews in Israel is, as they say, justified. They glorify the terrorists. They chant of their exhilaration, their happiness over our deaths. They chant, long live October 7th, and they pray for more days like it. Yesterday, I witnessed hundreds, if not thousands of people gathered in the center of New York City in Times Square in explicit support of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the IRGC, and to demonize and delegitimize the Jewish people and the Jewish state. It was frightening to watch. And sadly, one person I know who I considered a friend was there in solidarity with these terrorists and terrorist sympathizers and supporters. Lately, I find myself oscillating between hope and despair. Gatherings like the one I witnessed yesterday, and I'm sure there'll be one like it tomorrow on the anniversary of October 7th, they're frightening. Living through my grandparents' testimonies and the testimonies of other survivors of the Holocaust, I see way too many similarities. It is the reason I value gatherings like this one, if only for 1 hour to feel support, a temporary reprieve from the insanity and hatred, for validation of my existence and belonging with others. These are the moments that help and allow me to recalibrate, recenter, and give me strength and hope to go on. It is now my honor to introduce our guest for this evening, Alon Penzel. Alon is an Israeli spokesperson, author, journalist, and social activist and TV anchor. He served as IDF spokesperson for the foreign press and in the Unit for Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories, also known as COGAT. And today he represents the State of Israel in the international arena at global conferences, events, and lectures. Alon won the prestigious Ramon Award for Excellence and Leadership after publishing his first book at the age of 16. He is now the author of a recently published Testimonies Without Boundaries, Israel, October 7th, 2023, which is now available in Hebrew and English worldwide and will hopefully be available in many other languages, as we know it's important for the world to hear these testimonies and know the horrific truth about Hamas and the wicked October 7th terrorist attack on the Jewish people. Throughout Alon's presentation, we invite you to share comments and questions in the chat. At the end of Alon's presentation, we will open up the program for Q&A. No matter how incredible these programs are, and thank God they always are, your participation at the end of the program adds so much more meaning and value. At that time, please feel free to raise your virtual hand if I can't see your real hand, or unmute yourself to ask your questions directly. And I can also share your questions and comments from the chat. And just one announcement before we begin. If you are in New York City on Sunday, October 27th, please join me and 3GNY for our annual intergenerational brunch. In addition to schmoozing and schmears, we are honored to welcome this year's speaker, Doris Schechter, who will share with us her incredible journey of survival and resilience. 3GNY is the incredible educational organization founded by grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, an organization of which I'm a proud board member. Our mission is to preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust, and we welcome survivors, descendants, supporters, and allies to join us on Sunday, October 27th in New York City for our in-person intergenerational brunch. Again, I want to thank all of you for being here, your continued support, and I also want to say thank you and welcome Alon Penzel. Alon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, for everything that you're doing, and everyone, thank you for being here today. As you just said, yesterday, I think there were thousands of pro-Hamas protesters who were just marching the streets of Times Square, Manhattan, proudly chanting Intifada, Intifada, proudly being proud of October 7th and everything that happened. I was there as well, marching as well, proudly holding the Israeli flag. And this is what I'm calling upon everyone to do, feeling proud, being proud of who we are, each one in his own way, being proud of who we are and what we are, and we should not be afraid. And as long as human dignity is on our side, we will prevail. And with that, I'll say that just like you said, my grandfather was also a Holocaust survivor, and as a grandson of Matan Angres, who's still being held hostage in Gaza. On October 7th, I felt the duty to commemorate the atrocities that were carried out by Hamas and our terrorist organizations, basically everyone who decided to infiltrate Israel and commit the atrocities that day. And so I'll jump right into it. And right after October 7th, I got down there and I started collecting testimonies from Zaka volunteers and Nova survivors and Israel's Medical Forensic Institute, which is the institution in Israel where the bodies that initially were not identified because of how severe the condition was, were brought to and were examined in. And I started speaking with these people and I started interviewing them. I started getting exposed to the atrocities, which I definitely share in the book. And the book is unique in two main ways, I believe, because there are hundreds of initiatives. This is the book, right, about October 7th. And first, there are over 50 testimonies in the book. Most of them, I believe, that you will find as exclusive new ones that you have not yet been exposed to, that the public has not yet been exposed to. And the second thing, which has been important for me from the very beginning, was to make sure that I describe the atrocities that happen on the ground as they were, without trying to soften them, sanitizing them, censoring or filtering them. I felt, and I still do, that I do not have the privilege to try and soften the atrocities that were committed. As first of all, it didn't happen to me, and people tell me that, and I feel the obligation to tell them as they are. And also, I believe that if this is the worldwide denial and anti-Semitism that we're experiencing 1 year after October 7th, just imagine what is going to happen in 50 years from now. And so out of that understanding that we would face worldwide denial and that the world would basically deny what happened on October 7th, as simple as that. Some of them deny what happened, some of them know what happened and still support it, some of them have no idea that October 7th even existed, that there was something special about October 7th. And so when I started collecting the testimony from Zaka, from the recovery forces, I started seeing and hearing, both seeing and hearing, how inhumane humanity can possibly be. I heard testimonies, and here I want to apologize if I'm going too graphic. Testimonies about children who were not only beheaded, but also their hands were cut off. And a couple who was tied up to a mattress using metal wires that were inserted to their stomachs into their bodies. And many other testimonies from that horrific day. And again, I felt a duty not to sanitize the information I had, as challenging as it might be to hear the testimonies, as challenging as it might be to face the atrocities. I felt the obligation to keep it as it is. Because if we don't have all the details, the elaborated information from the ground, then we won't be able to make sure people know what happened. And the second step was going to Israel's Medical Forensic Institute and speaking to people basically who took care of the bodies that were not initially identified. And then I went through the bodies, and the difficulty, the emotional challenge there was not only the visuals that I was exposed to, but also the connection that I had to make between a specific body and a name, a person, a face, a human being, sometimes a child, was killed on October 7th. Now I know who that 12-year-old beheaded girl is. Now I know her name. Now I know her family. Now I know her history. Now I can see her photos while she was still alive. That emotional process has been challenging from the very beginning. And just a second, sorry, I have. So I apologize, and I'm back here. And I'll start from I'll continue exactly where I stopped. Although the emotional process was very challenging, I do not regret what I have done. I do not regret starting this project, starting this initiative. I believe from the bottom of my heart that I am privileged to have been given up the opportunity to commemorate the brothers and sisters that were slaughtered. And so, although it was very difficult already on the second step, obviously talking to recovery forces and medical forces, I also reached out to Nova survivors, those who survived the festival, those who had to make difficult decisions on the ground. Just imagine, do I keep running for my life? Do I jeopardize my life by stopping and helping my friends who just got shot? How do I pave my path towards survival? And so also in that step, I had to ask very insensitive questions sometimes in order to get to, again, the most elaborated details, in order to get to the bottom of what happened. I had to ask sometimes the most difficult questions, people who have just been through the worst. For instance, I'll give you an example of a situation I had with an interviewer, and I also describe that interaction in the book, about a Nova survivor who tells me about a friend who died, was murdered just in front of him. And I have to ask him for the specific details of the murder. Obviously, this is not something you want to do. Obviously, you don't want to be insensitive. But I do believe that we don't have a choice. Because apparently when it comes to Israel and the Jewish people, we need evidence, we need proofs in order to believe us. And this is what happens. And so I came up with all the information I had and the materials that I collected and the testimonies that I was working very hard of. And then in order to make sure that all the testimonies are 100% verified, I went to speak with Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Israel's Ministry of Diaspora and women organizations which were assigned on behalf of Israel to investigate war crimes and sexual abuse from October 7th, to make sure that all testimonies have been 100% verified. Once I did that, I was ready to upload the book to Amazon to make sure that the international community can get exposed to the atrocities, to what happened. And then Amazon decided to blacklist the book. It cited violation of guidelines. It didn't say which guidelines had been violated. It didn't say what we should do in order to adjust the book to a situation where it would fit Amazon, but it just decided basically to disapprove it, to deny it, to reject it, to blacklist it. And only after press coverage, approximately 2 weeks later, we managed to get the book to Amazon. Although we still haven't received any response from Amazon stating what happened and why it was blacklisted from first place. And this is just an example of, I can't tell you exactly what the reasoning was. I can just speculate. You can speculate as well, I guess. But this is one challenge of many. Michael, you spoke at the beginning of the conversation about the rally that was taking place in Times Square yesterday, and which I also participated in. And I believe that we are surrounded by an international community that unfortunately gives space and allows anti-Semitism to take place. And this is just one example of the challenges that we have been facing since the book was out and generally since October 7th occurred. And I'm sure that such challenges will be faced in the future as well. Since the book was out, I've been in touch. I've been going to world tours all over the world, and I've been in touch with journalists and diplomats and world leaders and with the public itself. I'm going from one place to another with one clear purpose: to commemorate the atrocities that were committed, that were carried out, by telling the testimonies that I witnessed, by making sure that I tell the testimonies just like I did with you, just like I'm doing with you right now, as they are, without trying to soften them, because what happened on October 7th shouldn't be softened. It was cruel, it was tough. And it's been a year since October 7th. Who can believe it? Who can believe that the hostages were still there? This is really hard for me to say that because, I can't comprehend that a year has passed since. I can comprehend, still cannot really comprehend that the atrocities were committed. Sometimes I'm frequently asked about the reactions and the comments I receive from the international community about the book and about the testimonies. So obviously in the international community, there is sometimes people try to contradict or refute what I say. People try to say that this is, the content and the testimonies are not real, have not been verified, that rape never existed on October 7th. That's, that is very so-called understandable. This is not something that we didn't anticipate from the international community. But I can tell you, and that's very unfortunate, that also within Israeli communities, but mainly Jewish communities around the world, also here in the United States, there are people who deny what happened on October 7th, who do not define Hamas as a terrorist organization, who go to pro-Hamas rallies just like yesterday. And I believe that our ability to overcome and prevail October 7th, and we definitely will, because, on October 7th, they were trying to exterminate, they were trying to kill us, and unfortunately, they did in some part. And they were trying to take us hostage, and unfortunately, many of us were taken hostage. But they were also trying to exterminate the Jewish spirit because of the extent of cruelty was, again, it's very hard to comprehend it. So they were not coming here only to kill us, but also to exterminate the Jewish spirit. But they didn't, and they won't. The fact that we're standing here commemorating them, sharing the testimonies of the victims, is exactly the base for our ability to overcome October 7th, to overcome its consequences, to understand that for our resilience, we need our unity. And this is why I mentioned the Israeli and especially the Jewish communities all around the world and also here in the United States, expressing how frustrated I am to see Jewish communities that do not believe or do not want to believe or do not want to comprehend or prefer to stay ignorant to what happened on October 7th. So with all that, and I really want to move to Q&A from the very simple reason that I truly believe the interaction, as you just said, at the beginning, that the engagement here with the audience is the most important, and this is what I do at every talk. So just before we go to Q&A, and I'd love to answer any question you might have, I would like to say, I believe that this book is one of the most important historical commemoration initiatives of the Jewish and the Israeli people. Because it is unsanitized, because it covers exclusive testimonies from October 7th, because we'll be holding this book in 50 years from now to fight and combat anti-Semitism and worldwide denial of October 7th. So I do honestly believe that this is not an individual mission of mine and not even a national mission, but an international mission that each one of us needs to take upon himself, regardless of whether he is Jew, Christian, Muslim, regardless where he is from. You just have to be a rational human being to oppose what happened on October 7th. On October 7th, not only Jews and Israelis were murdered and slaughtered, but also foreign employees and Muslims and Christians and people from dozens of countries around the world. So I'm calling upon you and upon the international community to first realize that the fight against Hamas and that October 7th attack wasn't an attack against Israel and against the Jewish people, but an international attack against humanity, and that the fight against Hamas and for the commemoration of October 7th is an international fight. So I'm calling upon you to go to Amazon and purchase the book Testimonies Without Boundaries, Israel, October 7th, 2023. I'm encouraging you to review it on Amazon because we're dealing with pro-Palestinians, pro-Hamas who just, comment and review it without even reading the book. So go there and support us. I'm encouraging you to send it to as many friends and family members and relatives and neighbors as you know, to make sure they read the book and are exposed to the atrocities. And with that, I think we can go to Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Alon. People can feel free to unmute themselves and ask questions, or they can raise their virtual hand in case I don't see you and I can't call on you, or you can type in your questions or comments in the chat. I have a lot, and I have a few that came in when people registered. So I'll start with those for people to just process what they heard. But please, at any time, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your virtual hand, etc. Alon, you took on a pretty heavy undertaking by doing these interviews. It's a really big challenge, I know, from doing these programs and as a therapist asking difficult questions. So I want to ask you, what particular skill set do you feel like you had from work in the past or life experiences that you felt could help you on this tremendous task that you took on?
So I'll definitely share. Um, when I was younger, I took part in many different leadership organizations, and tried to do some kind of public diplomacy around the world, way before October 7th. But then when I got drafted during my military service, I served as the spokesperson to the foreign media in the Unit for Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories, POGAT. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what it means, it's basically a unit that handles civilian affairs in the Palestinian territories. And here is very important because, people say October 7th was justified because the Palestinians had been oppressed for decades. And October 7th was justified because of Israeli apartheid. So obviously October 7th is not justified anyway. But let's go to the allegations about apartheid and any discriminations toward Palestinians. Our military unit, and I was a spokesperson of the military unit, we were coordinating life-saving medical treatments for Gazan patients to enter Israel from Gaza to Israeli hospitals, take care of themselves and of their families. We granted permits to Palestinians to enter Israel for over 40 different reasons, whether it's to pray in Israel, whether it's to work and make a living to their families, whether it's just to travel. During COVID, we were coordinating joint trainings for both Israeli and Palestinian doctors in order to know how to combat COVID. We're coordinating a vaccination campaign for over 100,000 Palestinians from Judea and Samaria. We're giving test kits and vaccines. We're sending test kits to the Gaza Strip. And even during military operations, if you can recall the military operation of Guardians of the Walls during 2021, May 2021, we provided the people of the Gaza Strip with humanitarian assistance through the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is basically the commercial crossing between Israel and Gaza. And while at the same time, while we were transferring trucks with humanitarian equipments to the people of the Gaza Strip, during the operation, Hamas was targeting specifically those trucks with the humanitarian equipment. It was launching mortar shells specifically at the trucks, which were used to provide humanitarian assistance and aid to the people of Gaza. And if we're also talking about, I mentioned life-saving medical treatments and help to Palestinian patients from Gaza. So it was also targeting the Erez crossing, which served for the transfer of Palestinian patients from Gaza to Israel. So it was also targeting and hitting, by the way, the Erez crossing, preventing Israel from being able to transfer Gaza patients for treatments in Israel. So that was the first step of my experience to get to know basically the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from a very close perspective. Even before that, I went here to the United States for a couple of months to live in a camp that is dedicated to bring teenagers from conflict zones, either Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Indo-Pakistani conflict. And we had consistent everyday dialogue for almost 2 hours every day about the conflict. I wrote my first book about my experiences from camp. And as I said, I participated in many different leadership organizations. I got drafted to the military. I was a spokesperson to the foreign media under that unit, under the Ministry of Defense. I was also exposed, as I was in consistent touch with hundreds of journalists from all around the world, to anti-Zionism that is clearly also anti-Semitism from most of the international news outlets. That probably, I'm sure that there are people from many different countries in this Zoom, and I'm sure that you know it better than I do.
And so when October 7th occurred, I took all this experience and I believe expertise that I gained throughout the years in order to bring it into a document that, again, I'm saying, I do believe is one of the most important documentation in the history of the Jewish people. Just like we're fighting the commemoration of the Holocaust right now, it will be even harder to fight the documentation of October 7th with, with the AIs that this is taking place today, with the fake news world that we're currently living in. So I'm sure and I'm certain that as we're experiencing it now, it will just get worse during the years. And this is why I believe it's so important to commemorate it, as challenging as it here to document it, and as challenging as it here to read it.
Yeah, good point. It's difficult to read. I normally say run out and buy the book I recommended. In this book, I say run away from. It is so graphic and very difficult to read. For the same reason, I think it's very important, but it's just very hard to get through. I think it's important to read it. I think part of the reason, as you said, for this book is to combat misinformation and denial, like Holocaust denial we have. We now have October 7th denial. It falls in the same boat and for the same reasons. There was also something in your book, you interviewed someone in your book who said that, or a common theme, I should say, from most of your interviews is that there was systemic abuse. And I feel like no matter what we talk about, I mean, it would be enough that there wasn't systemic abuse in a terrorist attack, right? For people to know that this happened. But the fact that there were these planned abuse of people's bodies before they were murdered and after they were murdered. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, as I said, Hamas terrorists didn't infiltrate Israel in order to kill Israelis. They came here in order to terrorize, in order to frighten, in order to torture, to abuse, to humiliate. It had very clear instructions what to do. People sometimes they ask me, so did the atrocities occur, in one place or a specific incident of a crazy, mad terrorist who decided to torture an entire family before he murdered it? No, it happened everywhere, in so many different incidents, in so many different ways, in so many different locations, which means that it was completely premeditated and that the instructions were given were very clear. So I can give you an example, unfortunately a very difficult one, of a little boy who was found in one of the kibbutzim, and you can find it more elaborately in the book as well, who, when he was found in a very unusual position of the body compared to other bodies on October 7th. He didn't have gunshots on his body, which is very rare because even the bodies that were burnt had gunshots on the body. And this child was not only beheaded, but his hands were also cut off. And in this specific situation, you can't tell for sure whether the child was first beheaded or whether his hands were cut off. But you know for sure, since there were no gunshots on the body, that he was tortured while he was still alive. So this is the extent of cruelty of October 7th. People were also nailed to doors in their houses, inside their houses. There are entire families, each one of the family members was tortured in a different way. Families were burnt alive. There are families who were found by the recovery forces as one block. At the beginning, obviously, the recovery forces thought it was one body. And when they were trying, to take DNA and extract and understand what the block was, they realized it was 6 different human beings, an entire family that basically, it's even hard to say, kind of melted together into one block because it was burnt alive, and the extent of the burning, the degrees was so high, not enough just to kill them, but also so there would be nothing left of their bodies. And this is what I'm saying, the torture and the abuse of Hamas terrorists was very clear. They wanted not only to kill, but also to make sure that the families of the victims wouldn't even have a grave to come and grieve on. It was very clear. They tried to exterminate the Jewish spirit. Obviously, they didn't, because here we are, and we'll overcome and we'll prevail. There is no question. But this is what they tried to do. And the atrocities were hard, and they were premeditated, and the instructions were clear, and the atrocities happened everywhere. And this is important to mention.
And I think, as you said, they found on the bodies of the terrorists these plans, these intricate plans on how to abuse people and where to go. So there was inside information of Gazans who came into Israel and spent time in the kibbutzim, who collected this information for the terrorists. So they had that information when they went in. You break your book into 3 parts. You speak with Zaka volunteers and Forensic Medicine Institute workers, and then survivors from Nova. And you said it was about 50 or so interviews. Can you talk about the difference between, you mentioned slightly, but just so people understand a little bit more, the difference between the Zaka workers or the Zaka volunteers and the Forensic Medicine Institute team? Again, you sort of briefly described the need for both, but can you talk a little bit more about those 2 teams?
So, first of all, I'll say, just to emphasize and be clear, there were approximately 20 interviews, but the testimonies obviously were around 50, because there are some people who share different testimonies. There is someone who shares 8 testimonies perhaps, and there are some people who shared the same testimonies because they were there on the ground on the same place. And I guess the difference, first of all, when I spoke with Zaka volunteers, they were basically the recovery forces that recover the bodies. Usually what they do is having a very clear procedure, taking DNA and footprints from the body. It takes about an hour for each body. And then on October 7th, we have to remember, in the days after October 7th, there were still terrorists in the kibbutzim. There were still terrorists in the places where the bodies were collected. And obviously also, even if there hadn't been terrorists there, it would have been almost impossible to try and take DNA from the bodies in the conditions they were in. So they were recovering the bodies. They were jeopardizing their lives to do so. It's very important to mention. And then Israel's Medical Forensic Institute, which is the institution that basically follows the work that is done by Zaka, it basically takes the bodies, the specific bodies that Zaka and others were unable to identify, and tries to examine them more carefully. And then the work there can be done for months, because sometimes what was left of people was just bones. Sometimes it was just ash. Sometimes it was a little piece from a human body. Nothing from the body, but the body had never been found, but there was just a little finger or anything from the body. And then the institution has to determine whether the person is dead or not. You are perhaps familiar with the story of Shani Locke, her body was taken hostage on October 7th, and then the institute was able to confirm her death while she was still in captivity. Before she was rescued, her body was rescued by the IDF. It was able to confirm her death by very small pieces of her brain that were found at the party zone. And this is exactly the work that was done. That was a very emotional and difficult part. And yes, cool. And then the third part was talking to Nova survivors. That was perhaps also a very emotional part, because we're talking about young people in my age who have just been through the worst and have just been seeing their friends and family members die. And I have to ask them very difficult questions. And sometimes I can still feel their guilt, I have to ask them about, their decision. what they did when they were there throughout their escape routes, throughout their their decisions on the ground. And sometimes, obviously, they feel guilty for the decisions they made and perhaps leaving friends and families behind. Obviously, understanding, we understand, or from an outside perspective, it's very clear that they are not the ones to be blamed, but you know how it is. And I also saw a question here, which is very important for me, about the sexual abuse of men, which is something that we rarely hear about, unfortunately. And this is why I also say that the testimonies in the book can be exclusive. One of the testimonies, and you can read more in the book, is about a family that basically the Zaka volunteers that I just described, that I just elaborated about, entered one of the kibbutzim. They entered one of the houses. They found 3 family members, the mother and 2 of her sons, of her children, of her kids, tied up and dead, shot in one room, but the father was not there. He was found in another room, actually in the safe room. He was completely naked. He was tied up, and a metal object was inserted into his groin. The metal object was still there when they found him, inside the groin. So this is one testimony about sexual abuse of men. More happened, unfortunately, at the party as well, and in the kibbutzim as well. And it is very important to discuss it as well, because then we understand that that Hamas, again, I'm saying it one time after time, Hamas came here to Israel to eliminate, to exterminate, to abuse, to humiliate, and to frighten and terrorize. And so sexual abuse of men happened as well. And I'm very happy, as glad as I can't say happy and I can't say glad, but you know what I mean by saying I'm satisfied with the fact we managed to get those testimonies as well, because it's important that they are commemorated too.
One of the people you interviewed is an Israeli Muslim, and he says that Hamas are not human, and to see what they did is to understand. I wrestle with this. I think we can never know what happened because we didn't, thank God, experience it ourselves, hopefully. And there's so much of kind of what you said, actually. I just want to go back to a comment that you said, Alon, that this idea of feeling guilty that they didn't help people or they focus on themselves to survive. It reminds me a lot of some of the testimonies I hear from survivors who may have this survivor's guilt or feel like they didn't do enough for other people. I just wanted to share that. But to go back to this comment, this Israeli Muslim who you interview, he says that the world needs to see it to believe it. And from what I'm seeing in this world with anti-Semitism, even when they see these videos from the footage that Hamas took themselves, they still don't believe. And your book is, in a sense, a living testimony for people to share. And once they see this, there are things that I couldn't imagine that were in this book. Do you think that this is actually something that will help for us to have people believe and understand and be with the Jewish people?
I do, because I know that those who, I'm not trying to reach out to those Palestinian pro-Hamas protesters that were there, yesterday on the streets of Manhattan. I'm not trying to reach out to people who would see the atrocities, acknowledge them, understand that they happen, and still support them. I'm trying to reach to the largest community, the majority of people, I believe, that simply doesn't know what happened on October 7th. So many people do not know what happened on October 7th. It's not because they're evil or because they're anti-Semite. It's because they are fed by the news, because they have not heard enough, because they don't know enough. And I believe that once people know, and this is exactly what is written in the book, and you're right, with that Muslim volunteer, that says once people are aware of what happened, or if the atrocities of the extent of cruelty that October 7th, that was unleashed on October 7th, people cannot support Hamas. People have to identify with the with Israel. Simple as that. And I believe that we're exposing, and since the book was out, I believe that I've received so many comments from so many people around the world who told me I had no idea what happened, and finally we do. So I believe that who I'm reaching out, the audience that I'm reaching out to is basically the audience that doesn't know what happened on October 7th, not those who know and deny, not those who know and support, but those who don't know. And this is why it's so important to commemorate it. And regarding, you mentioned the Muslim volunteer, it's maybe important to mention again, it just shows us, there are so many Muslim heroes as well who are fighting on October 7th, and rescue forces who are there from the Muslim community and from the Christian community who are supporting Israel. And Muslims were also slaughtered on October 7th. There's so many foreign employees and from so many nationalities. Again, that was an attack against humanity, not only against the Jewish people and Israel.
Thank you for mentioning that and for saying that. I think a lot of times the loud, hopefully minority is all we see and all we hear, and that's where our focus is. But I do hope and try to believe that we have the majority of humanity on our side, and that people are with us. You did work as in the IDF, speaking with the foreign press. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because here we are talking about misinformation and educating people. With your role as an IDF spokesperson, did you come across that with your work? And do you have examples of trying to give information to the media so people can have accurate information, and what that was like for you?
So sometimes there were situations where I provided specific elaborated information to the media in order to publish it, and they simply decided not to do it. I can give you an example from, again, Guardian of the Walls, about, I don't know if you can recall, but there was a huge New York Times article at the end of the operation about the children that died during the operation. And I gave the New York Times very specific information about specific kids in specific locations around the Gaza Strip who died as a result of rockets that were launched by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other terrorist organizations and fell inside the Gaza Strip and killed the kids. And the New York Times didn't even bother to publish it, not even to mention it in a story sharing basically the information about the kids that died during the operation. So this is just one example that we are facing with as, not only as a spokesperson, but I believe that when we're trying, each one that is here today in the Zoom and that is listening now, we try to bring the word out, the message out, wherever it is, whatever it is, whether it's on October 7th or everything that has happened since. And we're reaching so many obstacles, and the main one perhaps is the media. So we should definitely keep working hard to make sure we are fighting the media and get the information there as much as we can. But is it a challenge? It is. Is it also a reason why people are denying October 7th because the media is not doing enough in order to basically expose what happened on October 7th? It is a challenge. It is true. We simply should not give up.
I think one of the scary things is we say that people are getting their information from TikTok and unreliable sources, but it almost seems like they're getting them from quote unquote reliable sources as well. For this New York Times article, do you know why, or was there any follow-up why they didn't add your information into the article?
Can you repeat?
Sure. I was saying that although people do get their information from unreliable sources, they also get them from reliable sources like the New York Times. So I'm wondering, do you know why they did not put in the information that you gave them? Was there a reason or any follow-up?
So that's the question. We're saying, reliable information, reliable sources, and unfortunately, they're not that reliable and credible because, unfortunately, they have, again, there are the editors, and those news outlets are sponsored by specific countries and organizations you can imagine. And in order to keep being funded by those organizations, they need to keep a very certain agenda. And this is what they do. And you want to believe, like each one of us, that such large, huge news outlets such as the BBC and CNN and New York Times would be, would be credible and reliable and dedicated to credibility and honesty, as they're huge news outlets, but probably people go after money, and these organizations are funded by very specific organizations and by very specific countries, and they have very specific policies that even if you find a decent journalist who you believe you can work with, sometimes the editors or people above basically prevent it from happening, preventing the truth from coming out.
So you're speaking to the choir. We don't have to read the book to understand or believe what happened, and I think, in our own ways, however that may be, we support Israel and the Jewish people. Can you talk about your experience? I know you were you went to the protests yesterday. Can you talk about speaking to people who are maybe not allies or friends of the Jewish people or the Jewish state, what your experience with them has been like?
You can ask people about October 7th. Some of them deny that it even happened, and those who do, most of them, especially yesterday at the rally, argue that this is because of decades of frustration of Palestinians, and this is because of decades of apartheid and inequality and discrimination. And the reason that there is no, the explanation, why there is no discrimination, apartheid, I've already given you, but, they say it, and I'm asking them, okay, let's say it has all happened. Let's assume it did. Does it justify October 7th? And they tell you right to the face, we understand why they did it. We cannot call Hamas a terrorist organizations because we know what they had been suffering for years. And again, as I said, there is this small community, unfortunately, we hear it a lot, that supports Hamas and supports the atrocities. But there are also communities that are just there because it becomes, some kind of a trend in the US, and I believe that in many other places in the around the world, to just support Palestine, support Gaza, support Hamas, without even understanding that by supporting Hamas, they are first and foremost hurting and harming the people of the Gaza Strip. As we all know, Hamas cynically uses them as human shields, launching rockets from residential territories such as cemeteries and hospitals. As we know, the Islamic Jihad, just at the beginning of this war, launched a rocket from a cemetery that hit a hospital and killed people. And so I believe that the people are there. There are some people who, organize the entire rallies. There are some people who just join it because they think they support it and they don't know enough. There are people who are just there because it's a trend. But the vast majority simply doesn't know what it is talking about. And when you confront them with serious questions about what happened on the ground, they can't give you answers.
There were moments of humanity and hope and what was described as miracles in the book as well. One that I recall is this family, a few young people at the Nova Festival. They went together, 4 members of a family, they went to the Nova Festival, and they saved each other's life. And there was a miracle, a person who they accidentally, or they took someone else's car to save themselves. And this woman did not have her car, so she could not leave the festival. And because she was stranded at the festival, she found their cousin, and she saved this cousin's life. And they all met after. And I think it's moments like that are beautiful, and they also are highlighted in the book, as well as the important work of the Zaka workers, the volunteers, and the Forensic Medicine Institute workers. It's quite beautiful. There's a lot in there that I didn't know and I learned from the book. From those you've interviewed in the book, has anyone had a chance to read the interviews or speak to you after it was the book was out?
So I did definitely follow up with them, and we're still in touch. And I think they did it from the very understanding that commemorating what happened is the most important, even if it's very hard. Even if it's obviously hard for us to express what we experienced on October 7th, we have the duty. I always say they are one of the only people in the world I'm not trying to exaggerate, but I do believe in it, that know exactly what happened and saw it on the ground. And therefore, I believe that they understand the importance. And so they were cooperating with me from the very beginning, and we have been working together in order to publish, not only to publish the book, because again, the purpose is not only to publish it, but also make sure that it is spread all over the world and that people can actually get exposed to it. So we are working together, and definitely, yeah.
And then from your interviews and your work, and as an Israeli, how have you found these volunteers, the workers and survivors, and all Israelis for that matter, are coping? How have you learned about coping strategies, or how they're coping with what happened and what's going on currently?
So obviously each one of us deals in a different way. For instance, some believe that it's very subjective, because some believe that after October 7th they got a new perspective of life, and they now believe that they should make the best of every moment of their lives, especially after what happened to them, and they know now how fragile life is. And on the other hand, I'm trying to be as optimistic as I can, and to share as many positive views as I can. Just a second.
And I think you do a beautiful job doing that in this book, which is a very tough read. Like I said, there are moments of miracles and moments of lightness.
Exactly. And on the other side, there are people who say, after I saw what happened on October 7th, I believe, there is nothing to live for. So I would be honest and say that it comes from both directions, especially from people who are there. Hopefully, it will go to as many people as possible who are there on the ground would feel the first, would feel that there is what to live for, and we should make the best of every moment. But it definitely comes in both ways. And these are the consequences of October 7th. You're not only optimistic, and the I mean the conclusions that someone gets from October 7th, from what he experienced, are not always very positive. And this is something that the survivors have to deal with, absolutely.
We've mentioned it before, you mentioned in your book, but there's sort of this similarity with Holocaust survivors. There are people who either come closer to God or lose their faith in God or have a new take on life. Some people feel like they can't go on while others do. So as you said, I think there's a varied response. I see Trish has her hand raised, and then Yvette. So Trish, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just had a question. I belong to a prayer group, and is there anything specific that you wish us to say prayers over vis-a-vis this horrible situation?
So obviously to all the victims, but if you ask me personally, from a very personal perspective of mine, the things that touched me the most when it comes to October 7th, but that's just because I have two nieces and two nephews who are a very important part of my life. I would say I would pray for the children, not only who sacrificed their lives, but also who, unfortunately, their lives were sacrificed and who were slaughtered on October 7th, but also those who, unfortunately, remained without their parents. And for basically all the children of Israel and the Jewish people. And
these are children, these are children. There can be nothing worse than that. So if you're asking me personally what to pray for, this is what I personally feel. But obviously, unfortunately, the victims were from all directions and areas, from all aspects, from all ages and from all genders, from every possible, criteria.
And I believe there are different lists of survivors and victims of October 7th that has their names. They're easy to find. I can share them with you, Trish.
Okay,
Just a prayer for them as well. Thank you.
okay.
Yvette, and then I see Rosa's hand is raised.
What can we do here in the United States in addition to buying this book and getting it out there to people that don't know in order to help this not happen again?
So, as I said, not being afraid, being very proud of who we are, and that means showing and showing up in both Israeli, pro-Israeli rallies and unfortunately also pro-Hamas rallies, making sure we show the international community and people who are in the middle, as I described, making sure we show them that this is not only the pro-Palestinian agenda that is taking place and that the Palestinians are just going all over the streets. We should just be there physically and online, everywhere we can, to make sure that we are there as well, that the Israeli flags are waved, that it's not just the Palestinian flag and the support of Hamas, and unfortunately also Nazi signs and symbols, but also to make sure that they see our side and that Israel, yesterday when we were at the pro-Palestinian protest, there were also some other pro-Israeli protesters, and we're chanting, "We stand with Israel, we won't be silent." So we won't silence us. We should allow to be silenced. And this is probably the best we can do. In regard more to specifically to commemorating the events. It's not just buying the book, but actually knowing what happened on October 7th. I know it's challenging, I know it's hard, but probably there is no choice, because if we don't convey this message forward, who will?
Okay, thank you.
Rosa, you had your hand raised, and then Eleanor, please.
Yes, first of all, Alon, thank you for documenting this, for realizing how important it is and for doing it. Secondly, I asked someone who is not Jewish and who is not in the US, if you had to share two testimonies, which are the toughest one that you had to record, and the one that was uplifting, maybe of a survivor or of someone who, like you said, gained a better perspective after the 7th. Which ones would those be? So that we have something to share with people who maybe will not read the whole book, but we can still get the gist of it out there. Thank you.
So I think that perhaps the testimony that touched, again, I'm saying the testimonies that touch me the most, I believe, are the testimonies about kids, about children. One more testimony that I can share with you about a child who was found in one of the houses in the kibbutzim. And unfortunately, he was not only found burnt, but there was also a knife stuck in his skull, inside the head. And next to the little body of the child, there was also a hammer. And on the hammer itself were still pieces of the child's skull. So I'm sorry for being as graphic, but if you're asking me the most difficult testimony that I experienced, this is definitely one of them.
And the good one?
Uplifting testimony, I think, would be, well, there are many, because there are so many testimonies of heroism from Nova, and so many testimonies of of bravery. And so I think one of them would be the fact that there was one, and you can definitely read it about it in the book, one Nova survivor who was basically there for many of not only his friends but also relatives and people who were just there on the ground during his own escape route. And I think that once you read it and you realize how heroic people were on the ground, although they have to basically save their own lives, what they did was trying to help others and making sure that others would remain safe. So I think sharing these kind of testimonies is very important to show the bravery of the people of Israel and the heroism of the people of Israel.
Thank you.
Do you have any details, Alon, from one of those stories that you can share with us?
So perhaps one testimony can be about a Nova survivor, one who unfortunately had cancer, and he was on his way to the party. He didn't make it on time because he was there to the party area in the morning. And he was basically, because the terrorists first arrived in the area of Re'im before they arrived, basically at the time they were arriving at Nova. And this friend, basically, who was there at the Migunit, who was hiding before getting to the party, he was informing his friends. He was informing his friends who were at the party at the time, 9 of his friends, where to go, what to do, in order to basically try and take care of themselves, knowing that the terrorists would come there as soon as possible. And while it was happening, and while he was talking to his friend on the phone, explaining to him that they should be protecting themselves because the terrorists are on the way, he was shot a couple of times inside the Migunit. He survived. And unfortunately, now he's also facing his cancer and is a critical condition, and we're all praying for him.
Thank you. And Eleanor, you had your hand raised, and I know Lindley, you had your hand raised.
Okay. So Alon, and I think Michael, you also said that you were at the pro-Palestinian rally in Times Square yesterday. Did you feel New York police protection when you were speaking up, or including flags? What kind of police protection did you get?
So basically the question of protect, you're talking about yesterday, right? The rally, or so that's a great question. I feel in some way, when there were some Israeli protesters there, pro-Israeli protesters as well, and what happened was basically that I felt, at least, that they were kind of locking them in a small, small box, surrounded by barricades and security forces, obviously to protect them from the pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas protesters. But it felt very bad to me to see, a very brave Israeli group who's trying to protest against the evil of the support of Hamas and the terrorism, just, being locked up in some small space, trying to protest, unfortunately not so successfully because we're definitely outnumbered. So I definitely went out there and was trying, not only to interview people, but also marching with the Israeli flag very proudly. So there you don't really have the security of the security force. You don't really have the security forces around you. But again, this is very subjective. This is a very subjective issue. I guess each one of us and the way he feels. But I personally felt like the Israeli group was protesting against the protest for Hamas was kind of locked up in some small space instead of being
given the opportunity to protest properly. So this is what I felt from my personal perspective yesterday. And since it was supposed I really have to go soon to another event, but I do want to say that I was asked here, I saw the question on the chat, asking me about would I come to speak, would I do this and that. You have my contact information, Michael, you can send my contact information as well, definitely. Feel free to reach out. The purpose is to spread the message as much as possible, to spread the word, and I'll do whatever I can in order to make sure that happens. So please reach out. Also, I'll mention it, if we're trying to translate the book to as many languages as possible, so we are looking for donations, if that's possible, from on your behalf, because we're not funded by any organization or formal institution. I'm doing it completely independently and as a personal initiative of mine. And if you can help, that would be amazing. You'll have my details, so you can definitely reach out to me. And yeah, definitely, I'm here.
Alon, do you have time for 2 questions? If not, I understand, because you're running. We can't hear you.
So perhaps one more last question, because really have to go to another event.
Okay, sure. Lindley, and then I just want to thank you. And then if anyone else has any questions, I know, Michael, you had your hand raised. We can share that question with Alon after. Lindley, if you want to ask.
I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. And Michael, thank you for this. It's just touching. We do as much as we can here in New York. And we were in a situation, I'm not going to go into it. We were at a place where they were right at us. And we called people and they came to support us with Israeli flags. So I just commend you and just keep doing what you're doing. And we will do what we can do. And thank you so much, both of you, for what you do and what you're doing, Alon. Oh my gosh, it's just amazing. Thank you. I just had to say that to you.
It means a lot to me, it does.
Awesome. In that case, Alon, I'm going to say that wasn't a question, so we still got one. I'm going to ask Michael to answer, if that's okay with you. You know me.
Okay, so yeah, one last question. What
All
is
right,
it?
I love you, Alon. Thank you.
Okay, so Alon, I work with the NYPD, and I'd like to find out if you'd like to come and speak at the police academy, particularly for the different graduating classes. And I have to say, although I heard your disappointment about how the police treated you at the protest, that's how they treat the Palestinians protesters as well. They channel them or they corral them to keep them from causing trouble. And they probably were concerned about the pro-Israeli protesters causing trouble with the pro-Hamas protesters. So they pen you in. That is the standard practice. So just so you're aware of it. And it may feel disappointing because you're not able to kind of be more vocal or be more engaged in the crowds. But if you're outnumbered 2 to 3 to 1, I think you're probably better off being penned in and surrounded by the NYPD than trying to mingle in a crowd of a bunch of angry pro-Hamas supporters from Brooklyn and Queens and Paterson, New Jersey. So just keep that in mind.
So sure, this is first of all, I would say I want to commend the security forces for the work they're doing, and I'm sure that the work they have been doing, especially since October 7th, and especially in the United States, has been very difficult with pro-Hamas protesters. That was just a personal feeling of mine, but I'll definitely keep it in mind. Regarding your offer, I'd love to talk about you about it personally with you, and definitely try to collaborate and make sure we distribute the testimonies as much as possible.
Real quick, I just want to share with this entire group, Michael, if I can, real quick. So on October 6th, there were a group of New York City police senior officers from Westchester County, from Long Island, and from New York City, who were visiting with a group that was sponsored by the Jewish Community Relations Council to understand about issues of terrorism, issues of how to protect people's rights, and they were visiting Israel. They were actually in the south of Israel. They were in Sderot when the attack broke out. They all were brought down to shelters in the hotel that they were staying in, and they were there the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, I think through the 11th until they could get a flight back to New York. So a lot of the very senior executives, particularly of the NYPD, saw what was going on. They were exposed to it. So they have a unique perspective that a lot of other police departments in the United States do not have. And I just want to make you aware of that. It may not all trickle down to the guy who's, at the barrier, but the guys who are wearing the white shirts, a lot of the guys who are wearing the white shirts, who are in the very senior levels, the assistant commissioners, the deputy chiefs, many of them were there. All right. So they have a very different perspective as a result of that. So, it may make you understand some of what's going on in a different way. And I'm just going to end there because I know we're running late.
I just want to say one thing and then I want Alon to have the last word. So New York Post, I believe, just had an article this morning, maybe, of the NYPD that spent time in Israel. So I'll share that in follow-up email. But I just want to say thank you all for being here. Alon, thank you for the incredible work you do. I'm telling you, if you read this book, it is very difficult.
I bought the book. I just bought the book.
Awesome. It's a very difficult to read, but I think it's very important. And when you read this, you'll understand. For me, there was so much more urgency about speaking to people about what's going on. Alon, I want you to have the last word, but I also want to say thank you for being here, Alon, for taking the time. You had so much going on today, and you still have something that you're going to. I want to thank everyone for being here. May we all have a blessed new year, and may you have a program tomorrow where you can be with community, good community, to process what's been going on this year. So Alon, I want to give you the last word, and thank you.
So I do want to appreciate everyone who's here. It means a lot to me, really. I speak with people in the United States and in other places, in different countries around the world. I believe we have a global and international mission to commemorate the atrocities, to commemorate what happened to our brothers and sisters. For some of us, October 7th is tomorrow. For some of us on the other side of Earth, it's already now. This is the time. We don't have any other time. It's our obligation to commemorate the atrocities. Get the book, make sure others do. Read the testimonies and make sure others know the testimonies as well, as challenging as they are. This is what happened to us on October 7th. And in order to overcome, we also have to learn from the past, understand what happened, and commemorate it. So thank you so much for being here. And I'd love to speak with you personally via email if you want. Yeah.
I'll go ahead and share that also. Everyone have a blessed and better new year. Take care, be well.
Thank you so much.